so now that we think that we know who we might need to talk to, who we're going to be sharing our story with, then you have to figure out what is the story that you're trying to tell. Okay? What is it you're going to be reporting? So the first piece of that is to look at your monitoring and evaluation data. Okay, so it's about looking at the story that the data is telling you, and I'm talking about both quantitative and qualitative data at this point, and then analyzing that data and figuring out what does this all mean. Okay, so what has happened, what has changed, why is it important? All right, but it's not just about reporting against indicators. I don't think impact reporting is not just a table to say this is what we expected and this is what was. Okay, that's not enough. It's about going a little bit deeper than that to figure out what it means and what the implications are. So hopefully, for any project you're going to be reporting about, you do have something that looks like this. This is a sample drawn from the project builder that we use at CAP Network that many of you, I think, are familiar with. But if you're not using this template, ideally you have something similar that outlines what it is you're trying to accomplish. What are the indicators of progress that you are using to monitor how things are going and to learn whether your approach is working? Okay, how are you collecting that data? So you do have some data to be drawing from when it comes to reporting back to any of your stakeholders. Okay. The questions that we're looking at, though, are not just what is the data, but what is the story that that data is telling? So what is the setting or context of this data? And that might be something you're getting from qualitative data, like focus groups or interviews. What is the action or story arc? So what happened? What did you do? What did other people do? How did they react? How did they change? What are the trends that you're seeing? And what are the outliers? Okay. Who are the characters involved? So who was involved in the work during this reporting period? Were different sets of characters impacted differently? So every project probably has some sort of form of disaggregation that they're doing, that you're doing when you're thinking about your beneficiary groups. It might be that you're looking at men and women separately. It might be based on age. It might be based on ethnic community. It might be based on youth who are in school versus youth who are out of school. But most likely in any project you're doing, you're looking at how different people are impacted differently by the project, because in an attempt to make sure that you're achieving positive results for the whole beneficiary group. Okay. Oh, I do see someone here saying government agencies on the list of stakeholders. So that's a good one to add to as well. Okay. So here's some guiding questions about the what. The piece. So what does the data say? So here's some questions that you can ask when you're looking at your data. And I think it's a pretty healthy practice from a monitoring and evaluation perspective to do this as a group. You know, if there's a project team involved, to look at your data set and ask these questions. So what was the setting from a story perspective? Was it a dark and stormy night? Was it harvest season? Was it school holidays? Was it the planting season? Was it an election season? What was the context of what was happening around you that was important or had implications on the story? What did you do, as in your project team or your organization, the project itself? How did people change? So this is connecting to that immediate level outcome of knowledge and capacity and access. What did they learn, right? And then how did their lives change? So how did the project or their experience of the project, how did that change the way they're living their lives in terms of behavior, social organization, action within the community? The next level after the what is the story is so what? Why does this matter? Why does this information matter? So how is this contributing to higher level outcomes? How is this impacting sustainability or
support by chair
quality? And what lessons are there to be learned? Okay, so this is going to the next step from what has happened to why does this matter? And some guiding questions, I think, to ask yourselves about why what happened has mattered is how does it contribute to overall community needs, project goals, stakeholder interests. So these would be those bigger cross-cutting issues: sustainability, poverty reduction, gender equality, school enrollment, food security, those sort of big pieces that what you're doing might be contributing to or advancing in a particular place for particular people. How does what has happened matter from a national, regional, international policy alignment? Is what you're doing important in terms of advancing progress towards the SDGs, for example, or towards your country's national goal of universal vaccine coverage, or whatever it is, okay? And then from a learning perspective, why does it matter in terms of what was surprising? What were you not expecting to see that you did see? What was exciting? What worked particularly well? What are you happy to see happening because it reinforces your theory of change or tells you that you're on the right track? On the flip side, what was concerning? What didn't go as well? What surprised you in a bad way that means you need to make some sort of change or course correction? And what did you learn from your experience in that reporting period? What are the key takeaways that are going to impact how you move forward? And the moving forward part is the now what. So we've got the what, the so what, and now what. So what do you do next? What will you do next? What will people experience next? What are you hoping to see next? What is it you want the stakeholder you're reporting to do next? Okay. So these are your guiding questions. What are you expecting? What are you hoping? What are your next steps in terms of the actions you're going to take? Are these things different based on the learning, based on what you've observed and seen in the last reporting period? Okay, that's an important thing to be noting and also being really transparent about so that everyone knows how things are being adapted. Okay. Any other key questions that you guys like to ask yourselves when you're thinking about your impact story? Right. Naomi.
Thank you. I would think of a question like, what corrective action do you need to take for better planning or for the next project?
Yeah, excellent. Thank you. Anyone else? Okay, so now that you know what your story is and what is the story that you have to tell, the next thing that you need to consider is what is the story that these different stakeholders are looking to hear from you? So what are they interested in? And this is that little sweet spot, and I like this little cartoon here, this sweet spot of what you're actually going to include in your reporting to that stakeholder is the overlap of what you have to say and what they're interested in hearing. And where those two things come together, that is the story that you're going to want to focus on in your reporting to that particular stakeholder. Okay. So what is it that these different stakeholders need from you? Okay. So in terms of formal funder relationships, you may have contractual obligations about what you are going to report back to them. So make sure you keep an eye on those. For a lot of our stakeholders, though, there might not be any formal requirement for reporting. So you're going to have to think through that on your own about what is it that they need from you. And I think a good way to do that is to think about what their role is in relation to the project, or what their role is in relation to their job, for example, a function they play in the community, a function they play within your organization. And it may be funder, but it may be something else. It might be a local official who is responsible for overseeing the work of NGOs in that community. Or it could be that somebody is going to take what you report to them and report it up to someone higher up to them, or some sort of authority figure. It could be that it's someone who facilitates your work in the community, provides introductions, helps you gain legitimacy within the community you're trying to reach. So thinking about what they need from you in order to do their job or to play their role is a good question to be asking yourself. But beyond that, people are people, right? People are not functions. People are not jobs. People are humans. And so they may have their own personal priorities and interests as well, okay? So a local official may have a job that they need to do, and that means collecting data on all of the NGO projects happening in that region and reporting that up to the government. But they also might be someone with a brother who lives in the community where you're working. Okay, they might be someone with a vested interest in the work that you're doing. They may personally be very passionate about environmental sustainability and really want to understand what you're doing if you're working in that sphere. Okay, so thinking about what they want in addition to what they need. And then I think how you're going to communicate with them also needs to be informed by how they present information themselves. That gives you a sense of how they like to receive information, how they like to think about things. So if you're dealing with someone who you know is very, very formal, or someone who always talks about numbers or asks about numbers or presents data in data form, tables and that, and they're interested in numbers, then by all means, give them some numbers and present your information in that way. If there's someone who's really casual and they like to meet and just talk about things, then be a little bit more casual in how you share your story, okay? So thinking about each stakeholder will help you to present your information in the way that it's going to be best received. And the last thing is to think about what is it that you want from them? What power or influence that they have that can make your life easier or harder? What is it that you want them to think or feel based on the information you're sharing with them? And then what action do you want them to take on your behalf? Do you want them to renew their funding? Do they want you to approve your registration? Do you want them to introduce you to other stakeholders who are going to facilitate your work? Do you want them to contribute as a volunteer to the project? Do you want them to collaborate with you and share resources and information? So thinking about what it is that you are asking them to do in relation to your project also informs the way you report to them and the kinds of information you're going to share, okay? So you're trying to engage them in a way that's effective in helping them to take the action that you need them to take. Does anyone have an example of a stakeholder that's, say, not a funding partner that they report to on a regular basis or have in a particular project?
Hi, Claire. I have a question. This is Renata, Park Policy.
Hi.
Hi. So with the stakeholder analysis, do you really have to look at the most powerful stakeholder out of your multi-stakeholders to really address their needs, or do you have to get a neutral grounds for all the stakeholders? Does it depend on the power of the stakeholders on your project for you to present your impact? Can you clarify that, please? Thank you.
Sure. I mean, I think ideally you would be presenting your reports in a way that is customized to each of these different stakeholders. So, you may have priority, as you say, just in terms of priorities, there may be some stakeholders that are a higher priority for you in terms of reporting because they have a greater impact or influence on your ability to implement the project. I think though, the more that we can think about reporting as not being an afterthought or an aside, but something that we do that is really critical to our project success, right? Because this is about relationships and it is about learning and is about improvement, right? So the more that we can see this as being integral to doing good development work, then I think it behooves us to spend the time to do it right and to make sure that we are reporting effectively to each of our stakeholders. But yeah, in terms of priorities, anything that you do have a contractual relationship an obligation for reporting, obviously that's going to be probably your first priority because it's something you must do, and not doing it will have negative implications on the program. But I really do encourage you to think about all of your stakeholders, and not to forget that those that maybe seem to have the least power or influence actually have tremendous power and influence in terms of the success of our project. And by them, I'm referring to our beneficiaries, right? So these are the people I think that we are most likely to forget to treat as a stakeholder that should be reported to. But really their engagement and enthusiasm and contribution to the project is probably the most crucial, right? Because if your beneficiaries aren't on board, and if they don't feel a sense of ownership and belonging and respect and all of that within the project itself, then that's going to impact the way they engage, and ultimately that impacts the work that you're trying to do. So that's sort of, I guess, a roundabout answer to your question, Renata. But yes, you do need to think about sort of if you need to prioritize, then yeah, that is fair to think about sort of where are the biggest pieces of influence or your greatest need from stakeholders, and prioritize those first. But I do urge you to think about how you can find the time and the means to report to all of your stakeholders. Mark?
Hi, thanks, Claire. One of the things I've discovered I sometimes leave out when I'm developing the plan to do the documentation, to do the report, we've often forgotten to get permission from our stakeholders to publish their pictures or anything like that. So just to have some sort of form or some sort of recording documentation that someone said, oh, it's okay, you can use my picture if you're going to do your report.
Good point, Mark, for sure.
Definitely. And it's connected with another question that we have here, which is about reporting to the public. So maybe some of these communications will be targeted, or will happen in a meeting, or will happen in a report you send directly. But the question from Irfan is, when we're reporting to the public, which I think is an interesting question, because you have a certain message that you take out to the general public. How far can we publish to the public on projects that are being carried out with individual donor funds? So what if that's an important stakeholder group for you?
Yeah, so the general public and potentially even as Mark pointed out too, the media as an intermediary to reach an even broader public. I think the only thing that you need to be aware of is whether, as Mark points out, whether you have the permission from individuals, if you are sharing any personal information or names or experience, you're going to want to make sure that you have consent to do that, especially if you're going to be sharing publicly. But generally speaking, even if the work that you're doing is funded by one individual or one funder, I think the question you need to ask them is, do they want to be acknowledged when you speak about the work? And you may just want to have an agreement or an understanding with them about how their connection to the project will be acknowledged or mentioned or shared as part of the story you're telling to the public. But if it is a project that you are implementing, then you do have, you should feel free to speak about that to the public as examples of the work that you're doing, unless for any contractual reason you've been denied that. But I have never heard of a situation where the work itself could not be spoken about. I don't know if anyone's had any experience where someone had said, this must be secret or just private to your organization.
I have.
Okay. What was the context of that?
Well, I was in China, and I was working with different consulates from different countries, and some aspects of what we were doing, they didn't want us to share. So this was all in the contractual basis contracts that we had with them. So it was all clear and upfront that we cannot share this kind of information or that kind of information. So it was clear beforehand.
Was the work that was being done controversial work? Was it a concern around the politics of it?
Politics definitely came into play, especially working with other countries within China because of the sensitivity of some of the work we were doing. which might have embarrassed the government because we were pointing out, so like we were doing environmental work, so pointing out environmental deficiencies, which could be embarrassing. So we always had to be very careful and upfront with what we were doing and how we were reporting it.
That's very interesting. Thank you for sharing that, Mark. Interesting. But that was in a contract though. So it was clear to you that you could not share that information.
Well, the contract was vague, so we often had to call up our our contacts to say, is this okay? Is that okay?
Okay. So erred on the side of caution.
Yes.
Interesting. Okay. Okay. So just to recap, this cute little drawing. So what we're looking at for what is the story that we're going to tell is, what does the data tell us? What have we observed? What is the information we have to share? Who are our stakeholders and what are they interested in? What do we need from them? And then looking at where those two pieces overlap, okay? And focusing our reporting on that overlapped section, okay? Where our interests align.